off our recorders and we'll start this one. Okay, so my name is Erin Conlon and it's Thursday, September 27th, 2018. I am a history professor at Indiana University of Pennsylvania and I'm currently teaching an oral history course to undergraduate students. We partnered with the Historical and Genealogical Society of Indiana County to collect and analyze interviews about the city of Indiana. This collection is meant to complement work recently done on the histories of some of the older buildings that are still standing in Indiana. Our goal is to learn more about the community through people's experiences and memories. Today I'm interviewing Ms. Jean Williams in her home in Johnstown, Pennsylvania. So Ms. Williams, could you begin by stating and spelling your name, please?
Spelling my name?
Yep, just to make sure we get it right.
Jean Williams, Williams.
Thank you. And is Williams your maiden name, or were you married at one
No,
point?
my maiden name was Henry.
Okay. Henry?
Yes.
Okay, great. And if you're comfortable sharing it, would you mind telling me your birth date and year?
April 4, 1921.
Okay. So if I did my math right, that's 97 years old.
Right.
That's amazing. So I'd like to begin by finding out a little bit about your childhood. So where were you born?
I was born in Howard,
Okay.
Pennsylvania. That's not far from Indiana. Maybe less than 25 or 30 minutes from Indiana.
Okay. And did you grow up there as well?
I lived there for until I was about to go into first grade.
Okay.
Then my dad got a position in a coal mine where he was operating the coal mine, and he would hire immigrants and people to work in the coal mine. And there was a town called that we lived in, a small town, and our post office was Alberta. There wasn't a post office there or anything, just the town. There was a company store at one time when we first moved there, and he was asked to operate this mine for the people by the name of Heil, H-E-I-L, and they built the town. Some of the houses came from Sears and Roebuck, were built by Sears and Roebuck, and there was maybe most of the people that lived there were immigrants. So I grew up there, and we went to a grade school that had sixth grade, up to sixth grade. And we would have to walk down the street, down the hill by the company store, around the mines, the coal mine. I passed that every day. And then up to through the woods to the school. I was a twin. There were 10 in my family. We were very family oriented, and there were two sets of twins. I was one of the second set of twins.
Wow.
Both girls, all girls. There was 2 boys in the family, 6 girls and 2 boys.
Okay. Was the town itself that you moved to, did you say that was named Alberta? Was that what it was called?
Well, Alberta was a post office. There was another town, a coal mine nearby.
Okay.
And it was owned by a different company altogether. And it was called Alberta. It was the post office there. And that we would have to go down through the woods and up the road to get to the post office.
Do you know the name of the company that your dad was working for?
My dad was working for the Bethlehem Steel Company at first.
Okay.
Then later it became Redlands Coal Company.
Okay. And you had mentioned that a lot of the families that lived there were immigrant families. And could you tell me anything more about that?
Well, a lot of them could not speak English. And my dad would sometimes go to New York, and the men would come first, and then he would go to New York and pick up the families that would come. And they lived in the houses. We had one street where the Sears and Roebuck houses were built, where they ordered these from Sears and Roebuck Company. and there was no toilets in them. Then they had the outhouses, but the houses on the top of the hill were stucco houses, and they all had toilets. Then there was another street, two streets, when you first entered this town, where there was not outhouses. They were just small houses, I think, where they made of stone or brick or something. Not brick. It would be like cement blocks.
Okay, and were all of these, this town was still, or this area was in Indiana County?
Yes.
Okay, and where were the immigrants coming from?
Oh, from Italy. A lot of them came from Italy, and there was a family of Swedish people that we were very friendly with, and Hungarians, but mostly they were Italians.
Okay, and what was it like? I mean, if you said your father was running the mine, correct? So
Yes.
I'm assuming probably maybe a little bit of a higher social status than some of the workers coming in. And so what was the community like then?
Well, we had the biggest house in town. Of course, we had the most children too, and on this street where we lived, and then there was smaller houses along the street, and the stucco houses were maybe they would have 2 bedrooms, a big living room, and kitchen. And sometimes the Italians would have dances in their houses, and have dances on Saturday nights. My mother did not permit us to go, but we would sneak up and go to these dances where they had, and they would clean out all the furniture and just have benches sitting around in the living room, and they would have somebody with a accordion who would play the music, and they would dance. So now this would be mostly the Italian people, and I remember once there was a wedding, and one of the Hungarians had a wedding. It was a beautiful wedding. And they had it outside, and they built a platform where they could have this wedding, and had all kinds of greens and branches and trees all to decorate the area where they had the wedding. And I remember their name was Salmon, Margaret Salmon, and she married I think another Hungarian. But there was that in the town. And mostly just, and people would come and go. Sometimes they would be there for a while, then there would be a strike in the mines. And the mine would not work for maybe 1 or 2 months. And so the men would sit around and play cards. And my mother thought that was terrible. Because my mother was quite religious, and she did not approve of playing cards. She did not approve of going to movies and that sort of thing. But we did go to see the Dion quintuplets, were born at that time when we lived there. And my mother wanted to go and see that movie of the Dion quintuplets when they were first born. And we did go to that. Then my dad would take us to movies. We would go to school, and the kids from the school would tell us, "Oh, we went to Barnesboro to a movie last night," and it was the best movies were on Sunday night. Well, my mother didn't approve of movies at all on Sunday. So my dad would sometimes say, "Let's get ready, we'll go to a movie," and he would take us kids to the movie. My mother never went. But he would take us to the movie in Barnesboro, and they were always cowboys. So we go to school the next day, and the people would tell, the girls and the guys would tell us the movies they had seen in Barnesboro. When we got old enough, we would go to movies on a Sunday night, and not tell my mother. We'd tell my mother we were visiting some of the neighbors down the road. So we knew she didn't approve, so we'd just go to the movies occasionally.
Funny how
Not
some
very
things don't
often.
change with kids.
Yes, and we were friends with the kids that lived there and in this little town. And I remember I had a girlfriend by the name of Ann Esgro, and she had a couple brothers that worked in the coal mine. And then another house that was up there on the hill had her husband was killed or something or died, and she had about 5 or 6 children, and she had all nicknames: Goo Goo, Buddy, Big Baby, Little Baby. And she would come out on the back porch and call her children to come home if they were out. And we had a cow and we had chickens. And the kids would, my one sister, who was a year younger than Jane and I, would be our, what we call our cow puncher. And she would take the cow out to graze with the other kids in the town. And she never had to do dishes, but because she had to take the cow out to graze. And we had a garden above the house and one below the house. And then my dad would plant potatoes, and one of the farmers nearby would give him some property where he could plant potatoes, and we would have to go and help get the potatoes and collect them, and he would put them in our fruit cellar. And my mother canned meat and all sorts of vegetables. We had lots of canned foods during the winter. And chickens. He would go every year and get small chickens. He would have a brooder, what we call a brooder, in the basement, and he would start 100 or so chickens there, and some of them would die. And by the time he would put them into the pen in the spring, there would be maybe about 40 or 50 chickens left.
So
and he would he would sometimes we would have eggs. Continue those on for eggs, that we would have eggs for all the time.
Did your family then produce most of the food that you were consuming, or did you have to purchase things from the local store?
No, there would be a farmer come by every morning.
Okay.
And he lived in a farm. And he would come by with his wagon and horse. And we would, when our cow was we didn't get milk, then we would buy milk and eggs from him. And he would come by about every morning through the town and sell his produce.
And is that what the workers did as well then? Would they be buying from him, or what was their...
Yes, some of the workers would buy from him too. And when our cow, we had a wonderful cow. When our cow was milking, there was a family that would buy some milk from us, from my family.
What kind of, I was going to say, in terms of the sort of dynamics there, would different families sometimes kind of produce different things so that you could kind of purchase or trade within the community?
Had their own gardens for their own families. So, except that the fruit man would come in the summertime especially, and read the fruit man, because he would sometimes stop and play ball with us. Take time out and play ball with us, and we loved that. And when we lived in this town. And we would go berry picking. Some of the kids in the town, we would go berry picking with them, and we loved to pick blackberries, not huckleberries. It'd take forever to get a bucket of huckleberries. But my brothers would go with us, and we would go pick huckleberries, and my mother would make jelly from them, and the blackberries especially, and she would put apples with them and make jelly. So she was preparing all the time for food for the family. And sometimes we would have a cousin or an uncle stay with us who worked in the coal mine. And I remember one year they stayed with us. So my mother was always busy sewing, making us dresses, or try to get food, and she baked her own bread. And I would come home from school, and I would sometimes bake 2 cakes, one for our lunches for the next day at school, and one for our meal that night. So we were always providing for food for the family.
Yeah.
That was a big chore.
What was your mom's name?
My mother's name was Irma.
Okay.
And we had my mother had a sister who had she and her husband had a store. My dad would take the cushions out of the back seat of the car and go to that store and buy, I remember we would get butter. The butter was oleo, and it was not, it was pure white, and we would have to, there would be little tabs in that rolls of butter. They were 3-pound rolls, and we would have to get those and color that butter to use with the little tabs that came with it. And well, we called it butter, but it was really oleo that we used most of the time. And sometimes my mother would would save the cream and make butter from the milk that we had too. Not very often. So she was always busy providing for food and making us clothes. I wore panties made from flour sacks. We girls did. And when she washed, there'd be a big line of panties or underwear on the line from having that many girls in the
that's
family.
a big house full.
Yes.
What is oleo? I'm not familiar with that. You'd mentioned that it wasn't butter, it was oleo.
It was really oleo is what it was.
And what is that even? I'm not familiar.
Well, margarine.
Okay.
We called it oleo. Margarine
Okay.
is what it is in today's world.
Yeah.
Yes.
I was going to ask your father's name as well, since we've mentioned him.
Everybody called him Pat. His name was Merle.
Okay.
Merle Henry.
They call him Pet? Did you say as in like P-E-T or?
P-A-T.
P-A-T, Pat.
P-A-T. He was
Okay.
known as Pat Henry.
Okay, and you had mentioned then that he was managing the mine and that sometimes the workers would go on strike. And what did that kind of lead to in terms of the community, right? If your dad is managing the mine, I'm assuming he's more on the business side of it versus the workers who are striking against the company. So what was that like?
Well, the other people would have to live on welfare, would get, food from welfare. And but my dad always had work. His salary would be cut, but he always had work because he kept the mine going until the workers were ready to go back to work again. So, and I remember him coming up at lunchtime sometimes when the miners weren't there. So it was he had a busy job too, in hiring the people and keeping them happy, and he would go visit them, and it was just a nice community to live in because the people were so nice. And they liked him very much because he would go and visit them. And at Christmas time, the immigrants would come to our house with Christmas presents. They would bring candy for us, and they would bring wine or beer or something for my dad, which my mother opposed so much. And she would tell them not to bring that, but they did it anyway. So that was, and they liked him very much because he was very friendly with the natives.
Would they, when the miners were on strike, would the company or would your dad have to go out and recruit new workers to come in to work in the mines?
No, they weren't allowed to go into the mine at all.
Okay.
They would just have to wait until the mine was open again. So I think they went on a strike for higher wages mostly.
Yeah.
Is what they did.
Okay. And I was going to ask too, you had said there was the company store. Was it owned, like a company store owned by the mine?
By the coal company.
Oh.
Now, when we first moved to this town, there was a company store. And then it didn't operate more than 2 2 years, and then there was a company store in Howwood, which was 3 miles away. And this man who built the town of Howwood, their names was Heil, that opened these mines, these coal mines. There was one in Howwood and one where we lived. And they built this town of Howwood. They had a school there and 2 churches. They built a Catholic church and a Protestant church that I went to. It was a Presbyterian church I went to, and our family would go to that church. My dad would pack us all in the car on Sunday mornings. And my mother would be pregnant usually and didn't go, but she would go sometimes. And we went to Bible school at in that church, and I thought it was wonderful that family who built that town would build a church for the Protestants and a church for the Catholics.
And I may have missed this. Did you mention the name of the school or the church? I know you said it was Presbyterian. Did it have a particular name, or was it just the Presbyterian church?
It was just a Presbyterian church.
Okay.
In Howwood.
And was there a school affiliated with that, or where did you go to school when you were a child?
First we went to the grade school, not far from where the mine was. And first we went there for the first 6 grades. Then we would go down the road and a bus would pick us up and take us into Howwood. Okay. That's where we had the high school.
Okay. And I was going to ask a little bit, you had mentioned having family members that might come live with you to work in the mines. Do you have, or did you have at the time, a lot of extended family in the area? Like, what is a little bit of the history of your family?
Well, my mother's had about 7 people in her family, and so did my dad. But my dad's family lived mostly in Indiana, lived around Indiana and Penn Run. And my mother's family lived in Starford, Clymer, and places like that, in other coal mining towns. I don't remember any of my grandfathers. The one lived at our house when we first lived in Howwood, before we moved to this little town in Alberta. And he, I think, had a heart attack and died. That was my mother's father. And my dad's father took off with some other woman and left his family. Now, my dad's family, her name was Nancy Matilda Leidick, was my grandmother's name. And the Leidicks were pioneers of Indiana County, the Leidick family. So our ancestors were, there's one of them buried in the park at right there behind the Historical Society.
Memorial Park.
Yes. John Leidick is buried there.
Okay.
And that's one of our ancestors. And I didn't know about that until when I went to Indiana and I got involved with the Historical Society. The lady Mrs. Hellman, said, I have a chart I will give you of your ancestors. She gave this to me, and I took it home, put it in a Bible, never looked at it. Years later, I looked at that, and there was our ancestor. I have that chart, yes, where she has him listed as John Leidick, who is buried in Memorial Park and is the ancestor, our ancestor.
Interesting. I had a student a couple of years ago whose last name was Leidick from Indiana, so I wonder if the two of you perhaps are related.
It could be. It could be. See, and we never associated so much with them. And the reason was because my grandfather left his wife and ran off with another woman and had another family down in West Virginia.
Okay.
And that was a scandal, of course.
Yeah.
And they never talked about it. I didn't know about it till I was older.
Okay. So when your family would come and stay with you for a little bit, where would they stay?
Oh, well that was something, because there was 4 bedrooms in this house, and my brothers would get up. They worked at night, my brothers would get up and go to school, and then they would go and sleep in their beds during the day, and my brothers would go off to school, and they would take the beds,
Okay.
the bed where they slept.
Yeah, 24-hour schedule in your house.
Right.
For some of the people who were working, where you had talked about, the different immigrant groups that were coming in, what's your family ancestry in terms of where did your ancestors come from when they moved to Pennsylvania?
Well, they lived, my dad, that's my dad's, before he was married even. I think he was about 18 years old. The mines took that picture
Okay.
at the coal company. And we had that hanging in our house all the time. And then I inherited it when my parents passed away. But my parents were in a small coal mining town around Indiana. And they too were born in Indiana County.
Okay. Yeah, I was interested too to know in terms of, you talked about Italians and Hungarians and these other groups coming in. Was there ever animosity then between immigrant groups that, I knew you were a child at this point, but that you were aware of?
No, not really. The problem would be with, I remember the police coming around whenever there was strikes. Mm-hmm. That would be the only time. But everybody got along in the town. If one of the companies or someone was having a dance at their house, everybody was invited to come. So there was never any animosity or fights or anything like that.
Do you recall any African Americans living and working in the communities?
No, okay. There was none.
Because I know the population of Indiana still is quite small compared to, for being
Yes.
close to Pittsburgh or other areas. So I wasn't sure when it had started to diversify a bit more and if you had any recollections of
I never
that.
met a black person until I came to Indiana.
Okay. So we'll come back to that then in terms of when you started to move. So what you were been describing thus far, when you were sort of in your elementary school and living in the mining town near Alberta, that's all going to be in the 1920s into the early 1930s, correct?
To the 30s.
So as a historian, right, if I can kind of add some context, I was curious about, how you remembered and think about the era of the 1920s, right? Because as historians, we often talk about it as this sort of economic boom period throughout much of the country, and women are cutting their hair and wearing makeup, and the sort of flapper identity, even though we know a lot of women were not flappers. But I was wondering if you have any recollections of sort of those types of moments in the 1920s as well in the community.
Not a lot. We were always busy, going on the summertime, going out and picking berries, or we would play ball. And I remember we'd get a team together and play ball and games. And I remember at night we'd play Run, Sheep, Run. And we would mix with the people in the town. And that's what we did. Or we would go off into the woods and play. We played a lot in the woods. There was a stream below our house, down below our house. And we loved going down there and fishing. We'd get little minnows out of we'd put handkerchiefs in and get little minnows. And things of that nature is what we did in the summertime. And then in the winter, of course, we went to school.
Yeah. Did your parents ever talk about, or do you have any sort of memories of them sharing things of what life had been like during World War I, since you were born shortly after the war ended?
No, not at that time.
Okay.
No.
And then along similar lines, the kind of thinking of like the Great Depression, right? So you go through this 1920s period, and then the country moves into the Great Depression. What was life like during that period for you?
Well, I remember my mother collecting material from the welfare, and we never had dresses made from it, but she would help the people in the town. I remember her doing that. And they would sew and make their own clothes as much as possible, and collecting the people that were on welfare.
Was there any stigma attached at that point to being on welfare? Like, did anybody really think twice about people having to
No.
get food or clothing?
No. Not in this small area where we lived. Everybody was friendly and would look out for each other.
Did life seem really different from, when you were growing up as a young child in the 1920s to then sort of during the peak of the Depression in the 30s? Like, do you have any memories of it being a much more kind of tough time economically?
I remember we wore a lot of hand-me-downs because, we had twin sisters who were 2 years older, and it seemed that Jay and I would say we never got a new dress. We always wore hand-me-downs. And this went on in my family. And my mother, we'd buy the flowers in bags, in cloth bags. And she would use those bags to make underwear for us and things like that. But we knew we were in hard times because we didn't get much. We didn't get a lot for Christmas. We always had a Christmas tree, but we would not have an awful lot for Christmas.
And did the mine continue operating like normal during that period as well, or
Well, my dad would stay in the mine and go down and make sure that things were running and keep them ready for when the workers came back to work.
Okay.
He would do that mostly, and I don't know if he had much help in doing that. He did a lot on his own.
Okay. And so, as you're growing up then during this period, and like you said, you knew things were tight, what kinds of stuff would you do for activities? Would you still be going to movies? Or...
Occasionally we went to movies. We didn't go very often
Okay.
because having 4 or 5 children to take and paying their fee to the movies, although they only paid maybe 10 cents to go.
Did you have to work when you were in high school? Like, for paid work? I'm assuming you had chores.
We had chores at home, but there was no place for us to work.
Okay. And so then, can you tell me a little bit about, you grew up in some of these smaller communities like near Alberta and then in Hilewood. Would you guys go into like downtown, or I guess at the time it was Uptown, Indiana, right? Like in the actual town of Indiana?
Occasionally we would come to Indiana. When Bird was there was a parade in Indiana, and I remember my dad taking us to Indiana for that parade.
And was this, so it would be kind of a rare trip to go in?
Yes.
Okay.
That was unusual. But on Sunday afternoon, he would load us up in the car and take us for rides out in the country. And we'd always stop someplace, and he'd go in and bring an ice cream cone out for all of us.
Sounds pretty nice.
That was a treat.
Yeah. When you were visiting in Indiana, and then eventually I know you moved there and you had a house there, what was it like watching the community kind of grow over time, with the university as part of it and just the city itself with a growing hospital? Like, how would you kind of talk about the community and its change?
Well, what happened was that we would get jobs in Indiana. My twin sister and I worked in the 5 and 10, and my other sister, who went to college eventually, she also worked on weekends at the 5 and 10 and got a job there. And I had a younger sister. When she started, she was 5 years younger. She worked at a shoe store, and we worked in the places in the 5 and 10. My sister, I had one of my older sisters, went to college. For my brother, first of all, my oldest brother went to college, and the other brother went to worked at the coal mine on the tipple, not inside, but on the tipple outside. And then, of course, they went to war. They joined and went to war. when Roosevelt was president. And then we all had jobs at the 5 and 10. And I had a sister who worked at a drugstore, one at a shoe store, and then one of my youngest brothers became a stock boy at the 5 and 10. He was quite young; he was still in high school, and there was all of us working in Indiana. So we decided, and my mother was left out in a mining town with just the 3 youngest children, and we decided that they should move to Indiana. So my 2 sisters, my sister and I, my twin sister and I, and our youngest sister, we went out and we talked to them. And we asked them if they would like to move to Indiana. So we went house hunting, the 3 of us, and we found a house on 7th Street. It had 4 bedrooms and a big attic to it. And they came in and looked at the house. We were renting in apartments. We had small apartments that we were renting. And they moved to Indiana.
And how old were you then when you had initially moved to Indiana?
I was out of high school.
Okay. And this is when you were working at the 5 and 10, was
Yes.
after high school then? And
Yes.
what is the 5 and 10?
Do you know there was a family that lived in Indiana that started those 5 and 10s? And I think they were all over the East Coast.
Are they all grocery stores? Is
No,
that, or
5 and 10 had a soda fountain and all kinds of, there would be a candy counter, there would be a stationery counter, I worked at the electric counter. And the electric counter, there would be a dress department, and they were just big stores, and there were 2 of them. There was a McCreary 5 and 10, and there was a Murphy 5 and 10 in Indiana. And I worked at the Murphy 5 and 10.
and what did you do at the electric department?
Oh, people would come in and buy extension cords, or they would buy batteries, and I would sell batteries, and sometimes they'd bring their lamps in and want me to fix them, add a cord to them or something, which I would do. I learned how to do that.
Okay. And how long were you working there? Did you?
I worked there for about 10 years, and I was tired working there.
Okay.
My sister worked at the front of the store, and I worked at the back. And she left and went to the telephone company, worked at the telephone company. And I stayed with it for several years after that, and I got tired of it. And when I was about to get married, I decided I'm quitting. And I just quit. I didn't want any part of it after I was married. Then after I was married, a young girl that we knew, that my twin sister had got acquainted with this family, and her mother was having another child, so she brought the oldest child down to live with us, stay with us while her mother was having the other baby. And she belonged to the Girl Scouts. And I became interested in what she was doing. And I was asking her all about the Girl Scouts. The next thing I knew, I became a leader of the Girl Scouts. And then I got a job with the Girl Scouts. I was director of the Girl Scouts for over 10 years, and I ran their day camps.
And was that in Indiana County then?
Mm-hmm. The Kiwanis Club had built, the Girl Scouts had a plot of land right behind Rustic Lodge. And the Kiwanis Club had built a camp, a place for us to go camping right behind Rustic Lodge. And that building is there yet. So I was director of the Girl Scouts. And we would drive, on the weekends, my troop would go out there and stay for the weekend. And we would do campfires and had all sorts of things going on at that time.
And was that a full-time job then that you were directing for the Girl Scouts?
Yeah, at first I was the assistant, then I became a full-time job at the Girl Scouts. And I worked there for about 10 years till I had the same troop of girls one of them is singing in the choir at my church now.
That's great.
And I worked for them, and there was a Girl Scout council, and often the boys Scouts would call me up and say, oh, the boys were out at Suffmac camping, and they would call me up and say, oh, our boys are homesick. Would you want to bring some girls and come out? And I would round up some of the girls, and we would go out, and they would take us on canoes, and then they'd dance in the mess hall afterwards. And sometimes they were a little amazed how old my girls were to what the boys were.
How old were the girls, typically?
Well, I was with them until they were out of high school.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I was their leader until they were out of high school.
And then what did you do after Girl Scouts? Like, what were some of the other things you've done in terms of work?
Well, after Girl Scouts, I was involved in a lot of things in the community then. Because I had no children, I was free to do this. And my husband was telling me, go ahead, you can do this or you can do that, whatever you want to do. And I became involved with the New Century Club. I joined the New Century Club. I joined the Garden Club and Calvary Church. I joined Calvary Church.
And what was the New Century Club?
New Century Club was supported the library.
Okay. And I heard, when we were setting up, you had said that you'd served on lots of other committees in the community as well. What were you referring to with that?
Well, I was on a committee that, the Signs Welcomed Indiana.
Yeah.
I was on that committee for about 15 years.
Okay.
And we had a contest to get those signs, and I was chairman of the contest, where people would make a design for the sign and submit them to us, and then we had a Dr. Kip from the art department got him on the committee, 3 or 4 artists who would choose the sign to make for Indiana, and we had them at all the entrances.
Okay. And just to kind of help me get some chronology here, you've mentioned your husband. What was his name, and when were you guys married?
Oh, we were married, let's see, about, was it 1946?
Okay.
And he worked for the R&P Coal Company. There was a shop down where the Waller Gym is. Is it where Waller Gym down there? Behind Maple Street.
Okay.
And he worked at that shop for years. And the coal company was beginning to they were beginning to lose their workers and their sell out all their coal. And so they dispensed with that shop, and that's where he worked. Okay. He worked there for over 20 years, and then he got a job at the high school in the maintenance department after that, because he was still eligible to work.
Yeah, so you said where his building was, so then you had been working at the 5 and 10, and then you said when you married, or right around the time you were going to marry, you'd quit. Where was that building located? Like, does that building still exist in Indiana?
What, the 5 and 10?
Yeah.
Yes, they're up on Main Street. Do you know where the shoe store is on the corner of Main Street?
Yeah.
Right next to that shoe store, that big store there was, I don't know what's in it now.
Okay, I was going to say, I'll have to go look and see.
That was the Murphy 5 and 10, and across the street from Brody's was in the shoe store.
Okay.
And in 1950, Indiana was written up in the U.S. News and World Report, a magazine, where Indiana had more places of employment than any other county in the United States.
Wow.
And there was the sweater factory. There was the King leather factory that made billfolds. there was all the coal companies, and of course we had IUP, and there was Fisher Scientific in Indiana. There was all those businesses going on in Indiana at that time. And I think it was very short-lived.
And why do you think that was?
It was in the 1950s, just when, I don't know. And then the sweater factory moved out, so did the King Leather factory. King Leather made wonderful billfolds and keychains.
Where did they move to? Do you know if it was in the United States or other regions of the country?
I think they just dispersed.
Okay.
You know where their factory was? Right where the IUP, is it the Student Union?
Yeah.
Right there. Right
Okay, where
near
the
there.
hub is, yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Uh-huh.
Oh,
It
that's-
was right near there.
And so you said that would be in the 50s, and you'd married in 1946. And so had your husband been involved in World War II, or you said some of your family members?
His mother was an invalid, and he was taking care of his mother. And he was about to go when the war ended.
Okay. What do you remember about the war period?
I remember that we had very few men around the town, and there was a Capitol restaurant on the main street of town, and we would all end up at that Capitol restaurant. Maybe on Saturday nights we would go to the Vets Club, and then from the Vets Club we'd come and hang out at the Capitol restaurant, or during the week we'd go up to the Capitol restaurant and have a cup of coffee or Coke or something. And there was only about 7 boys who would come in did not go to service. And eventually some of them did go. But at first they were the only boys in the whole town.
And was your husband one of these boys that was around?
He was one of them, yes.
And so how did you meet then?
Well, at that restaurant.
Okay, and that was the Capitol Club?
Yeah, the Capitol Restaurant it was called.
Okay, and what did you mention, was it the Vets Club, V-E-S?
The Vets.
Okay.
That's
or
where
Vets.
the Vets is now.
Okay.
And
Vets
we
is in V-E-T-S.
Yeah.
Okay. And, I'm sorry, what did you say your husband's name was?
Ralph Williams.
Okay. And you had mentioned that you did not have any children.
No.
I don't want to ask too personal of a question, so feel free to say no, but I was wondering if that was a choice or just the way life kind of worked out.
I think it was just the way life worked out.
I'm always interested because it's a bit more unusual.
Yes, and I wanted to adopt children, but my husband was not eager to do that.
Okay. And so I guess maybe the Girl Scouts was a good fit.
Right. And I was busy with Girl Scouting, and I became the director, and I was off on camps. In fact, I went to the one and only jamboree. You know, the boys had their jamboree every year, and they would have it, I think, in New Mexico or something. And they would have the Boy Scouts from all over the United States collect. Well, the Girl Scouts decided they were going to do that. They did it 1 year, and I went to that. In fact, I was camping most of the time. The year we built our house, I was out camping most of the time.
And where was that? It was the Girl Scout.
The Girl Scout Jamboree.
Yeah.
It was near Michigan, I think, or near Chicago.
Were you able to travel much in your life, either to...
Not really.
Okay.
No,
Was that something you had an interest in?
not really. I was so busy with the Girl Scouts. Although with the Girl Scouts, I went to Washington, took a training course, and I sold the first Girl Scout cookies in Indiana. And I wanted the troop I wanted them to go to Maine, because the Girl Scouts had a ship in the harbor there that they kept in the harbor, and you could go and live on that ship for a week or two. And I wanted the girls to earn money. We earned money selling cookies, and I wanted them to go and on the ship and live. And they didn't want to do that. They said, "No, we want to go, but we want to go to a dude ranch." And I ended up going to a dude ranch in New York somewhere with the girls.
Okay.
And I was out camping with them a lot. In fact, I think I had the busiest troop in the whole United States because we were always doing things like that. And where did we go? Up to Altoona or someplace. We were going to go on a canoe trip. And we always talked about going on a canoe trip without the canoes. And we went up there camping instead of going on our canoe trip.
Was it not going on the canoe trip because it was just easier to go without the canoes?
Right.
Okay.
Yes, and we had trained to go, and we went out to the Boy Scout camp at Seth Mac, and we would go canoeing every week to learn how to manage our canoes. And then we went on our camping trip without the canoes.
Still sounds like you probably had a fun trip.
We did.
Did you guys ever go into Pittsburgh?
Not very often. I went with troops to Washington, D.C., but we didn't often go to Pittsburgh.
So, but you had gone a couple of times. Like, what do you recall at all? What the city was like? Because I've seen pictures of Pittsburgh, especially around World War II, right, where it was incredibly polluted from all of the steel production.
I remember being down there and coming through Pittsburgh late at night, and when I got home, I felt so dirty from all the dirt and dust, the pollution in Pittsburgh.
With growing up in mining towns, did you notice anything about pollution or sort of environmental issues?
We didn't notice that in Indiana.
Speaking of Indiana, and you'd mentioned the university, I believe you said a couple of your siblings had attended. Did you not have an interest in going to college, or again, was it more about an option?
Jane and I would have loved to have gone to college, but our parents didn't have the money. It was during the Depression, too.
Okay.
They didn't have the money to send us.
Okay.
If anyone, our one sister went, and she only went for a year and a half. They should have sent one of us instead of her, because we were more interested.
Yeah. So with your husband then as well, you said he did not go to the university, correct? He had been working for the coal mine and then switched over to maintenance after that? Did you guys have any interaction with people from the university? Because I know sometimes there can be some community tensions.
Not a lot except at church.
Okay.
Or maybe no, I don't know that I had any children in the Girl Scouts from the university.
Okay.
In my troop, not. There wasn't. There'd be doctors and the Kissingers. He may have worked for the coal company.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Coal is king in Indiana at one time.
Yeah, and do you have memories of when that started to fade?
Yes, when my husband was let out at his work, and at the shop where he worked.
Okay.
And they did away with that, and then bit by bit they closed the mines.
When your mom and the 3 younger children, I think you said, had moved into Indiana, was your father still alive at that point, and was he still out mining? Okay.
They made a bathhouse for the miners in the basement of the old company store. And my dad, there was a family that had lived up in the second story of the company store, above the company store. And so my dad had a room up there, and he would stay during the week out in the coal mine, but the coal mine, and then he would come into Indiana on the weekends.
Okay. And was he eventually able to retire from the coal mines?
Yes, he did.
Okay.
He made the sacrifice for all of us by staying there and living there during the week, and then come in on the weekends. And then after the mine where we lived, he also had another mine that he closed, and I think that's where he made his most money.
Okay.
Until that time, he did not have an awful lot of money, and did not make a lot of money at the coal mine until then, and he was considered working for the company, not a union person, and so he worked out the mine where we lived, and then in Howard. He went to Howard and did the mine there.
And did the mine, since you said he worked for the company, did they provide any sort of pension when he was retiring?
Yes, I think they did.
Okay.
Not a lot.
What about for your husband when he was working?
I got a small pension
Okay.
from him. He was more a union person.
Okay.
Worked for the union.
Okay, and so you'd said a lot of this was, into the 1950s and through the 60s, and again, if we sort of look at the bigger national kind of story at that point, right? It's a period of a lot of change, as the country is dealing with the Cold War and the Civil Rights Movement. And I was wondering how you remember or think of any of those things when you were living through them in Indiana.
During the deletion of the coal mines, I remember the towns. Like the town where we lived, that mine was closed, and there would be other mines around us that would close.
Mm-hmm.
And then the farming became quite an industry around. And I think people used their farms more at that time during the war.
Okay. And then after the war, right, when all these men are returning, I'm assuming a lot of them would have worked in the mines coming right after the war until they started to close. Was that?
Yeah, then a lot of them went to college.
Okay.
You could get free of college.
Yeah.
From at that time.
Yeah.
And so some of them went to college. Sanford Durrell, who taught at IUP, and he was one of them that did that.
Okay.
He was in the service. He came home, went to IUP, and became a teacher there, and wrote a book about it.
Okay. So as some of these changes were happening, I had asked earlier when you were a child if you remembered encountering any African Americans, and you had said there weren't really any in the community. I was wondering, by the time it gets to be, the 1960s, the 1970s, where, throughout much of the country, there's a very active civil rights movement, and you have, people like Martin Luther King really pushing for civil rights. Were there conversations about that happening in places like Indiana?
Yes. When I first came to Indiana, I worked at the 5 and 10s, and then I worked at Calvary Church as our Christian ed director I was working there as a teacher and as a superintendent of the Sunday school, and then our Christian ed director resigned, and they asked me if I would take over directing the Christian ed program at Calvary Church. So I did that for a number of years, and at that time I joined the Garden Club. I joined the New Century Club. And there was programs where you could join. And the Jewish people in the town that had the stores got together, and they formed some sort of a committee. And I remember I had joined that. And then I joined the Big Brother, Big Sister program. I joined that, and I became director of that for a while. And it seemed that everything I joined, I became the president of it or something. Because I would have no children, and I was free to come and go.
Did you enjoy doing all of those?
Yes, I did.
Good. With having, you said some of the store owners were Jewish. Did anyone in town care that they were Jewish, since a lot of you
No.
identified as Christian?
No, they didn't seem to.
Okay.
No, they became interested in the civic club and the garden club, and they were very good workers in these organizations.
Okay. And when more African Americans moved into the community, how did people feel about that?
Well, see, there were not too many.
Mm-hmm.
We had an area up in up where Bilo is now, called Chiviches,
Mm-hmm.
and it's still known as Chiviches.
Yeah.
And that's where the black community lived. Most of them came into that black community. And then they joined, they had a committee, and the churches became involved. I remember being in a march in Indiana where we had the blacks and the whites together. And the idea was that this committee that we would join with the blacks and invite them to come. And there was the swimming pool. When it was first opened, it was not open to blacks. And this committee got together and opened that pool to the blacks.
Is this one of the committees you were involved with as well?
I joined the committee,
And
yes.
what committee? Do you remember what it was?
I'm trying to think of what they called it. No, I can't remember.
So when you, so you were certainly, it sounds like, more progressive in thinking about race and making the community inclusive.
Well, I had a very good friend who was black.
Okay.
In fact, when she died, I buried her because she had no family, and she would. When I first met her, she worked at the 5 and 10 as a cleaning lady. Then later on, she joined this group of blacks and whites in the community, and she got a job doing community work of some type. I can't remember what it was, but she did that, and I became acquainted with her through this organization and through her work at the 5 and 10.
Okay.
And we became very good friends. In fact, we would go antiquing together. She and I and another friend I had
Okay.
would go antiquing together.
I know that the Ku Klux Klan was quite active, at least up towards Punxsutawney, for quite a while. Did you know anybody who chose to participate in the Ku Klux Klan?
Mm-hmm. My parents
Really?
were. My dad, before he had this mine out in Alberta, when he lived in Howwood, they got him to be a member of the Ku Klux Klan. And my mother had the costumes, one for her and one for him. And later in years, she hid those costumes in a cedar chest. My dad went to one meeting or so, and when they were burning this cross or something, that did it for him. But just at that, soon afterwards, he became manager of this coal mine where we moved to, and there was no Ku Klux Klan out there, but there was in Hollywood. And anyway, they had these costumes that they were given because he had joined the Ku Klux Klan. And years later, my mother made dresses for my sisters and I to wear, and they were white dresses with big red buttons. She put big red buttons on them.
So had they known what the organization was initially?
I don't know, because my parents would not have anything to do with it.
Yeah. So I was just curious how they ended up with, the full costume or the full regalia.
My mother would tell us about the people in the officials in this mine in Hollywood. There was a street behind the high school which we called what did we call it? Something special for the officials of the town that lived there. And the officials of the town became involved in the Ku Klux Klan, but not for long.
Okay.
And she said how they had burned the crosses. And my dad went to one of those, and that did it for him.
Okay. Yeah, I guess one other thing that I was thinking about is, as part of you were describing your life, that you were active in all of these different groups and had had multiple jobs. And I was thinking about sort of how women's opportunities have changed over time. And if you had any thoughts about, things that you could have done when you were younger or wished you could have done, or if it really, you felt like you got to do the things that you wanted.
Well, I think I did. I think in Indiana, when women became more prominent in jobs and things, and women did that in Indiana, and there was no problem about it at all, as I recall.
Yeah, I was going to say, you were born shortly after women
Yes.
had gotten the right to vote. Was your family, active? Were they people who, really valued voting or were politically active when you were growing up?
My parents always voted.
Okay.
Oh, yes. They instilled that in us, to always go vote.
Did you get involved with any of the local politics as part of your community
I did.
service?
In fact, I was going to be president of a women's group, the Republican Women.
Okay.
And for some reason, I didn't continue with that.
Okay. And then towards the end of interviews, I always like to ask if there is anything that I should have asked you about that I have not. If you have any thoughts you'd like to share.
We always thought of Indiana as a wonderful town. And people were very friendly and nice there. And when we joined the church, I joined Calvary Church, people were very friendly. In fact, Jane Blue just mentioned this to me yesterday when she was here, telling me how friendly and nice all the people are in Indiana. She said, Indiana is a wonderful town to retire in because the people were always so nice.
Did you, with coming to Johnstown, how long have you been here now?
I've only been here about 4 months.
Okay, so getting settled in still.
Yes.
All right.
It's been hard for me to leave Indiana.
Yeah, I would think so. It sounds like you have quite a strong network of friends that are still there.
Yes.
Okay.
Uh-huh.
Well,
I belonged to the garden club there, and my twin sister and I were very active in the garden club. In fact, our garden club has a garden on the campus.
yeah, I believe I've seen it before.
Yes. Uh-huh. And the fountain there on that campus is dedicated to my twin sister.
And who was that dedicated by?
Jane Dole, by the garden club.
Okay. And your sister's name was?
Jane Dole.
Okay. And why did they choose to donate this fountain on her behalf?
Well, she started the garden on the campus.
Okay.
There was a group of college students that had some money and wanted to do something, and they came to her and wanted to know how they could spend their money. And so she asked them if they would be interested in putting a garden on the campus, and she started that.
Okay.
I joined the garden club, and she was still working at the telephone company. And I was in a lot of things. And of course, she moved away to Colorado and came back with Pam. And she had Pam to take care of, and I had no children. But anyway, she said she was so jealous of me being in all these activities, in all these clubs and things, and she couldn't do that because she had her daughter to take care of. And then when she married and later on quit working, she joined the garden club, was president of the garden club. We both worked on the state board of the garden club, was very active in that organization, won awards for what we did there. And so she became president of the Garden Club of Indiana and the Evergreen. Then she started the Evergreen. We started together. We would do everything together.
Okay. So is there anything else that you'd like to share before we finish today?
Not really.
Well, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. It was just a real pleasure to be able to chat with you.
One of the things I noticed about Indiana, even though the stores were Penny's and Brody's and Troutman's are gone, something has taken its place that the main street does not look abandoned like in Johnstown or other towns.
Yeah, you're right. I think that is one of the nicest parts of the town. Is
Yes.
there is still a vibrant downtown
There is.
feeling to it. Well, good. Well, I will turn this off then. All right. It looks like success there.
Oh, I served on 2 jury trials in Indiana.
Should I turn it back on again?
No.
Well, you're out. Let me pause and we'll turn this
and they
off.
were one of them I was on 2 cases, and they were both rape cases.
Oh my goodness. That had to be quite traumatic.
That was.
I've got the audio recorder is still going, and we'll let it go for a minute. I had a friend who had served on one about a year or 2 ago, and said it was just one of the most horrible emotional experiences to participate in. She said it was just that was horrible.
Yes.
Yeah. Well,
I know a story you could share about when Kennedy was shot that day.
I was gonna say, do you mind if I turn it back on?
John Kennedy.
Oh, here, give me 1 second.
No, I don't remember too much about
Wasn't that the
thing.
day you got the bird crumbs out of the bird feeder?
Yes. Well, I was always interested in what was going on politically too, and who was running for office, and so forth, because our parents kind of instilled that in us, especially my dad, and that's why he joined the Ku Klux Klan, and they were always, kind of interested in what was going on in the community. And the day that Kennedy was shot, I was I had put some feed out for the birds, some bread and something, and I planned to go to the store to buy some more groceries, and I was so engrossed in the story about him, I didn't go. I went out in the bird feeder and brought in my birds, my dried bread, and used that to make supper that night.
That's good, being resourceful.
Yes.
I'm glad we turned the camera back on to catch that. That's a great story. But I was going to ask too, you had just said that, with your parents being politically active, that's how your dad had ended up, in the KKK. So what was the connection at that point in time between politics and the Klan?
Well, I don't know too much about it, except because I was so small at that time.
Okay.
Except that my mother was telling us about him they would get the officials of the town, anybody who had any, official capacity, to be involved in this. And that's what they did in Hollywood.
Okay. So would that have been probably in the
Well, let me see, I was born in 1920, in the 30s.
Okay. I just was trying to place, when you had said he had been back working in Hollywood a bit too. Okay, and yeah, the Klan certainly was quite active in our area during the 1920s and 30s.
Oh, I remember the CCC
Okay.
boys coming to Indiana.
What were they working on?
At something at the mine, or they were passing through. And my sister put her name and address on one of the coal cars. And a CC boy wrote to her, got her name and address off that coal car, and wrote to her. Then he wanted to come and see her. She sent him a picture of herself, and he wanted to come and see her, and my mother wouldn't let him.
Oh, that's another great story.
And I have one of the letters yet that he wrote to her. And we have a family reunion. At one of our family reunions, we had that for sale. at our family reunion.
Oh, that is funny. Do you have a close family in terms of, you had so many siblings. Are there still a lot of you in the
Yes.
area? And
That some families, they have disagreements among them. We never had in our family. We were always family oriented, and we helped each other.
that's nice.
And I never remember we would maybe have spats with each other, but I never remember not talking to one of my brothers or sisters.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a great story to end on. It's always nice to reflect on having
Yes.
a loving family.
And we still are to this day.
Yeah. Well, clearly we've got help with family taking care of you, and
Right.
very lucky.
I know.
So. All right. Well, thank you again.
And I have family living out from Indiana. They have a nursery out there, and they have one niece lives in one house, another niece in another one, and they have a smaller house where they rent
Okay. Oh, well, that's great.
and have a big nursery out there.
One of the Christmas tree nurseries?
No, a tree nursery.
Tree nursery. Okay. Well, great. That was